Rabotai, we are on Daf Vav Amud Bet. We are up to the Mishnah. And the Mishnah usually means when you hit a Mishnah that the Gemara immediately following is going to delve into the halakha or the halachic aspects of what we're learning rather than the agadic aspects, the life lessons, the stories that we experience. Not always the case, but many times it is so. Let's read the Mishnah together. It is perfectly timed because my birthday is Kafchet Adar Aleph, as we just had the conversation, and now we're going to deal with the idea of multiple Adars in the year. Says the Gemara, Kar'u et ha-Megillah be'Adar HaRishon. We read the Megillah on the first Adar, v'nit abra hashana, and they extended the year, okay? Korin ota be'Adar Sheni, we read the Megillah in the second Adar, and that's when you have Mikra Megillah. En ben Adar HaRishon la'Adar HaSheni, says the Gemara, there's the Mishnah, there's no difference between Adar HaRishon, first Adar and second Adar, ela kiryat Megillah u'matanot le'evyonim. Reading the Megillah and matanot, the gifts that we give to the poor. Indicating, at least on a first glance, when we look at the Mishnah, what does the Mishnah seem to be telling us? It seems to be telling us that everything else you could do in Adar Aleph. So as much as it's the time in Adar Bet, it's also the time in Adar Aleph. So even though the one that you read the Megillah in is in the second Adar, but if, as an example, you did Mishloach Manot in Adar Aleph on the 14th, in an unwalled city on the 15th of Adar Aleph in a walled city, then the halakha would be that you fulfilled the mitzvah, Mishloach Manot. You don't have to do it again. That's what the Mishnah seems to be telling us. Any other Adar-related halachot, you can fulfill whenever you want. Adar Sheni, though, is a requirement for Mikra Megillah and Matanot le'evyonim. That's the seeming interpretation of the Mishnah. Sorry?
It says Kar'u et ha-Megillah be'Adar HaRishon. So they read it on Adar Rishon.
Yeah, go ahead.
They must read it again.
No, so in a case where they read it in the first Adar, V'nit abra hashana, and then they extended the year, Korin ota be'Adar Sheni, they have to read it again in the second Adar. Indicating that not only is that the case, the Chatechila, but it's even the case, b'di'evid. So in other words, let's say I read in the first month already. I didn't realize. I read in the first month. Still have to read it again. Okay? Not that, you know what, better to read it in the second month. But if you read it in the first month, you did it. And we're going to come to see all the opinions regarding that in the Gemara. Let me just take 1 second to divert our attention here for a minute. What does it mean? They read the Megillah, v'nit abra hashana. So to us, that doesn't make any sense. Why? Because we live in a post-calendar world where we know, I could tell you from now until the end of time, how many times a birthday. I'm only like 7 years old because every 3 years you have we did work this out last time, right? So the idea, I could tell you not only how many have been, but how many will be, right? But at the time, they would decide based on a plethora of reasons and specific needs when they were going to extend the year and when they wouldn't. So you had scenarios where they would actually extend the year after they already read Megillah. Remember, that means that 1 month in the calendar year, in the biblical calendar year, does Adar fall? What comes after Adar? Nisan. Nisan is the beginning, is the first month. That means that they went round the whole year. They're in the 11th month. At what stage are we reading the Megillah? In the Ides of March, right? On the 14th and the 15th of the month. That means that half the month has already gone by. They're 11 and a half months into a 12-month cycle. There's 2 weeks left of the year. And then they decide, you know what, guys? Another month. That's how they did it. So the Mishnah's cases where they read, why'd they read? Because as far as they knew, there was only one Adar that year. They didn't read an Adar Aleph. They read an Adar. And then midway through the month, 3/4 of the way through the month, Beit Din is like, you know what? We decided another Adar. Now everybody read. It's not one community read. Everybody read them because they didn't know. Now the rabbi said, we're adding a month. So the whole Jewish people now have to read Megillah again in the second Adar. That is not a reality in our world. The only case where that would come to fruition is if there was someone that made a mistake. How could that happen? I mean, today it's very difficult with the internet, right? But imagine we go back to a time before the internet. You're a Chabad rabbi living God knows where on some island. You are the only person. And you know what? It's Adar. You forgot that there's Adar Sheni this year. You called the random Israeli soldier and this person whose name is Jacobowitz that if he figured out with him that he's Jewish, and you pulled together a minyan, no one knows anything. You're the only person supposed to, and you made a mistake. You forgot this Adar Sheni. What's the halacha?
Gotta read again.
So that's this Mishnah. That would be how this Mishnah could be relevant in a post-calendric year era. Okay.
There's a lot bigger problems coming after that, though, for that guy.
Well,
the guy Pesach he's celebrating, and
the guy has lots of problems.
Yeah.
Lots of problems.
Today we only read Adar Sheni.
Only read Adar Sheni. Correct. Okay.
I heard that I forgot where I heard it, that it's good to have a suga on Adar Aleph or Kata.
So there are people who have, that's an inyan, not a halacha.
But if somebody would have it, do they then fulfill the mitzvah of having the suga?
Interesting question. Interesting question.
Say yes.
We'll see. We'll come to it. We'll see. Again, because I don't want to. I'll just give you the short answer.
Probably jump into different.
When you're doing something not to be yotzeh, your ikar mitzvah, but to fulfill the minhag of having a seudah, your own intention is not to fulfill the mitzvah of mishloach manot, not to fulfill the idea of a seudah. You hear that? So therefore, you wouldn't be yotzeh, even according to this Mishnah, because that's not what you're trying to do. So that's a whole different question. But if a person by mistake had the seudah or thought that he was allowed to, so he really thought, I'm doing mishloach manot now, it's the only mishloach manot I'm doing because I learned this Mishnah and the Mishnah said I'm allowed to do mishloach manot. It would seem from this Mishnah that would be the halakha. Okay? And we'll come to it exactly. Sorry?
No.
Okay. Okay. Let's.
Did I say something? You said it.
You started saying something. So.
You were mumbling.
Okay.
Dazing off. All right.
All right. Let's leave off the last S for savings. That's what you're saying. Okay. Let's go. The Gemara now takes us into this. Okay. Now I read you the Mishnah in a way where you'll understand the Gemara using the assumptive powers that the Gemara adopts oftentimes. Let's go. Says the Gemara. When it comes to the matter of parashiyot, where it's so cool when what you're learning is so present. What did we just have yesterday? Parashat HaChodesh. There are 4 parashiyot that we read in the lead up to Pesach. What are they? They are Shekalim, Zachor, Para, Chodesh. Those are the 4 that we read. Now, those they don't always fall out all in Adar, right? Sometimes one of them is not in Adar, sometimes all of them are in Adar, but it's the time of Adar when we read the 4 parashiyot. So the Mishnah says, the Gemara says, if you just told me that the laws of Adar apply in Adar Rishon, everything except for Kiryat Megillah and Matanot Levunin, you mean Seder Parashiyot are also going to be read in either month that you want. Halinyan Seder Parashiyot Zev Shavin. You can read them in either month. Mani Matnitan. Now, having stated that fact, Mani Matnitan is the Gemara. Who is the Mishnah going according to? Lo Tanakama, v'lo Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi, v'lo Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. It's not the Tanakama, the first commenter in the Mishnah. It's not Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi, and it's not Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. What is the Gemara referring to? The Tanya, we learned. If they read the Megillah in the first Adar, Vinit Abra Shana, Korino Taba Adar Sheni. They read it in Adar Sheni. Shekol mitzvot shenohagot b'sheni. All the mitzvot that apply in the second month of Adar, nohagot barishon, also apply in the first month. Chutz mikra Megillah, except for mikra Megillah. What word is missing?
The
Matanot Levyonim. Excellent. So you've already noticed what the Gemara is going to say in just a second. So the first opinion, says the Mishnah, sans Matanot Levyonim. Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi says, En korinota be'adar hasheni. We don't read it in the second Adar. Shekol mitzvot shenoagot b'sheni, noagot barishon. The second opinion of Eliezer Rabbi Yossi is the outlier of all that we just learned. He says, doesn't make a difference. Adar Rishon, Adar Sheni, whichever one you do, all the same, no problem. Sorry. Kol mitzvot shenoagot b'sheni, noagot barishon, chutz mikra Megillah. Sorry. Kol mitzvot shenoagot b'sheni, noagot barishon. Rabbi Shimon. So obviously our Mishnah is not Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Mishum Rabbi Yossi, af korin ota be'adar sheni. We even read it in Adar Hasheni. Shko mitzvot shenegot b'sheni, en nohagot barishon. On not any mitzvah that's applicable in the Sheni, en nohagim barishon. So it's nothing applies. Now, in the halacha of Megillah, is the last opinion and the first opinion arguing? Remember, first opinion is Tanakama. Tanakama says, read it again. What does Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel say? Read it again. Same thing. Right? So we're going to have to figure out what's the difference between Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, if you're already in your Gemara head, you already picked out what's the differences between them. Now, in this halakha, there's no difference. Okay? Are we clear? So 3 opinions that we have in the Tanya. The first opinion is, read it in the first, read it again in the second. Because all the mitzvot are the same except for Mikra Megillah. Second opinion is, read it in the first, no problem. You don't have to read it in the second. Rabbi Yossi, the second opinion. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi. Third opinion, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, you have to read it again. Because no mitzvah of the second is allowed to be in the first. Okay. Says the Gemara, I just want to make sure that you guys are on the same page. What follows in the Gemara should be obvious to your mind right now. Obviously, the first opinion, last opinion are arguing on what? If you paid attention. First opinion says, read it again. You know why? Because Mikra Megillah is the only thing that you can't do in the first month. Last opinion says, you have to read it again. You know why? Because no mitzvot that you do in the second month could you do in the first month. What's the obvious argument? On all the other mitzvot.
Is it just Mikra Megillah or all the other?
Is it just Megillah? Exactly. Now, again, at a certain point, your brain and your eye picks this up before the Gemara does what we're about to do. Okay? Let's continue. Says the Gemara. Okay, sidebar, because we entered into this to ask the question, who's the Mishnah going according to? Okay? But before we do that, the Gemara says, hold up. How did we get to where we just got to? But all the opinions are equal. When it comes to fasting and when it comes to giving eulogies, everyone agrees that the first month and the second month are forbidden. By the way, you should just know, halakha, in Adar Rishon, on the 14th and 15th, we don't say Tahanun today in the Bet Knesset. Okay? Because this is an example of Zev Zeh Shavin when it comes to Hesped and Ta'anit.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Sure.
Isn't the Mishnah contradictory?
What do you mean?
Because they say if they read the Megillah in the first Adar, then you have to read it again in the second one. Okay.
Yeah.
Then they say there's no difference except reading Megillah.
Except reading
Megillah.
Except reading Megillah, meaning that Mikra Megillah is a difference, which means
it's a difference,
that you
right?
can't read it in the first.
No, I mean, well, why? Why does it mean that you can't read it in the second?
So one more time. Let's say they were the same. Adar Rishon, Adar Sheni. That means that you can read it in either.
Right.
Yeah, but it says except in reading it regular.
That's what it means. So they're the same, which would mean you could do it in either, except that Adar Sheni and Adar Rishon have a difference with regard to the Megillah. That with regard to the Megillah, second is specific, and with regards to Matanot Levionim, second is specific.
Okay.
As
specific to the second one. Not
exclusive. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
gotcha.
Okay? Now, the Gemara says, but I see what you mean that the language is a little confusing. Now the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Hainu Tanakama, ask the Gemara, isn't the last opinion the same as the first opinion? Because if you read the Megillah in the first month, you'd have to read it again in the second month. Amar Rav Papa, Rav Papa said, Seder Parshiot Ika Beinayu. The difference between them is Seder Parshiot, the other mitzvot of the month of Adar. Now, by the way, he also could have said the other mitzvot of Purim. So reading Shekalim, Para, Zachor, HaChodesh, what if you read it in the first month? So according to the Tanakama that says only Megillah is the difference, right? Then no problem. You're able to. No, only Megillah is the difference. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that says anything that's supposed to be in the second has to be in the second only, then he would make you read. He would make you read it again. Okay? The Tanakama savad lechatechila basheni. Ideally, it should be the second. V'avud barishon, but if you did it in the first one, avud, no problem. Bar mikra Megillah, except for mikra Megillah, that if you read the Megillah in the first, afagav de karu barishon, karu basheni. They have to read it again. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi. So that's the difference between the first opinion and the last opinion. Gemara continues. Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi Savar. Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi holds. Afilu mikra Megillah. Even if you read mikra Megillah in the first month, lechatechila barishon, you're allowed to read in the first month lechatechila. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
In other words, it makes no difference to Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi. Whatever you want to do, fada, go for it. Knock yourself out. Okay? Says the Gemara. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, "Afilu seder parashiyot, even these parashiyot, ikaru barishon, if you read them in the first month, karu basheni, you'd have to read them again." Mani. Now the Gemara goes back to its original question. Now that we've established the ground rules, who everyone is, what they actually hold. So who is our Mishnah going like when it says that the month of Adar Sheni is specific with regards to Mikra Megillah and Matanot Le'Evyonim, indicating that with regards to everything else, it doesn't matter. The Gemara says, Itanakama, if it's Tanakama, Kasha, it doesn't make sense, Matanot, because he doesn't mention Matanot. If it's Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi, Kasha Nami, Mikra Megillah. Mikra Megillah itself is the problem. So the whole body of the Mishnah doesn't go according to him. If it's Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Kasha, Seder Parashiyot. The Seder of the Parashiyot is a problem. Now remember, I started off by telling you that the Mishnah is going to make an assumption, which is going to make its life difficult. Because we started off by saying that there's no difference, indicating, other than Mikra Megillah, indicating that everything else, they're the same. The Gemara says that means that Seder Parashiyot would be whatever you wanted. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says no. The second month is specific with regards to all the mitzvot, indicating even the parashiyot. Okay? So that means that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel can't fit with the Mishnah. If the Gemara had not made that assumption, we would have an easy answer. And by the way, I'm going to ask you a question in just a second that I do not have a good answer to. Okay? Let's carry on. Answer the Gemara. Effectively, the Gemara is going to answer really, in some way, shape, or form, kind of the question I'm going to ask you. Le'olam, answers the Gemara, Le'olam Tanakama. Our Mishnah is really the Tanakama. V'tana Mikra Megillah, it said Mikra Megillah, V'hu hadin matanot le'evyonim. He also meant matanot le'evyonim. Deha beha talia. Because those two things are interdependent. The Mishnah decided to say it out explicitly. Mikra Megillah and Matanot le'evyonim. When the Tanakama told you Mikra Megillah, he expected you to be able to figure out that he also meant Matanot le'evyonim. Why? Because we already said previously on Megillah, we said explicitly the idea that anytime you move the Megillah from the 14th to the 12th, what do you do with Matanot le'evyonim? You move it to the 12th. Why? Because the eyes of the poor, they want to be able to get the money on the day of the Megillah, etc., etc., etc. So if that's the case, the Tanakama assumed you already know. By the way, when I was reading the Gemara the first time, I was like, I don't even get the question. Obviously, that's what it means. That's how you're supposed to be thinking. Look, I remember. We just tied the two together. So why don't we just say that Tanakama, that's what he means?
That
Right?
goes against the whole Gemara. You can't make assumptions on anything.
What do you mean?
How does he expect us to make an assumption?
Because you did
that
it.
he's
Because we did it.
Because we did it 3 pages ago.
No, so the point. I think the point is for them is like when they write it, it's supposed to be as concise as possible, and it's like, all right, that's been like said. So
And not only that, so the reason why the Gemara is having this conversation, even though we had that conversation earlier, is because this conversation and that conversation they didn't decide on day one and do daf bet. These are different conversations happening.
We're supposed to remember what happened 3 days ago. No, we're supposed to remember that the Aniyim are coming out during the time of the Megillah and they're expecting the money.
And they get messed over if you put Matanot le'evyonim
Just because we're reading
disconnected.
this 3 weeks later doesn't mean we should have remembered that. Right?
Yes.
So it's really our issue.
Yeah? Okay. So let's continue. All right? But your question of how do you make that assumption? Who told you to make that assumption? Is something I want to revisit in just 1 second.
That's why
okay?
we need the recaps every week.
Okay.
That wasn't a mumble, by the way.
That was a great one. You could call foul and you could call and one, but sometimes there's no and one. Okay, let's go. The Gemara says as follows. So that's the first opinion. The first opinion is that it's going according to the Tanakama, and when he said one, he meant the other. And if you want, say Leolam Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Really, the Mishnah is according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. What's going to be our problem if our Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? The problem is the parashiot. Umatnitan chisure mechser v'hachi katani. It's missing words. Now the Gemara doesn't mean to say, you know what, chuck extra words in and make it okay. What it means is that the Mishnah actually wasn't really referring specifically to this. So it led you to, it talked about what it needed to talk about, but assumed that you'd understand that this thing is really a sidebar. There's no difference between the 14th day of the first month of Adar and the 14th day of the month of Adar the second. Ela Mikra Megillah, only Mikra Megillah Matanot. But with regards to Hesped and Ta'anit, both months are the same. We're not talking about that. He doesn't mean physically, you know what I'm going to do to resolve my problem? I'm going to chuck extra words in the Mishnah and make it okay. Because I could do that too. You know what I'll do? I'm going to make this Mishnah now be according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Yossi, who says that if you read it the first time, you don't have to read it the second time. You know how? It's missing words. Really, the Mishnah should read, if you read it in the first month, it says, Korino ta b'adar sheni. I'm going to missing the word. Lo korino ta b'adar sheni. You just reverse the whole Mishnah. So if you're able to add words, we can make anything fit with anything.
Yeah.
That's not what the Mishnah means. The Chisure Mechsera has to be either that there's a tradition that the Mishnah was missing some words and we have someone else who had a Mishnah that's different than the Mishnah you're showing me. Or Chisure Mechsera means over here, topically, the Mishnah is not referring to what you're referring to. Now let me explain. I read this Mishnah, I saw the first assumption of the Gemara, and I was like, what in the world is the Gemara assuming over here? The Gemara over here is clearly talking about the laws of Adar. Are the laws of Adar the 4 parashiot?
No.
How can you prove that?
Because of the laws of Pesach.
No.
Because you may not read them during Adar.
Because sometimes you have one of the months, it's not an Adar. So how in the world would you have thought that the 4 parashiot is something that would be included in a conversation of Adar, not Adar? If sometimes they read in Adar, usually, but not always. So that's really, I believe, what the Gemara is saying over here, Chisure Mechsera. When I say Adar, what do I mean? I mean something that's specifically in Adar. What other halachot do we have in Adar other than something which relates to the 14th or the 15th of Adar? We don't. So the Gemara is actually saying, not anything that happens in Adar, it's the same, do whatever you want. It's not governing things that happen in Adar. It's governing halachot of Adar, which only relate to what? Purim. I have one other example. Machatzit shekel, which happens really before Mikra Megillah.
Okay.
I have another example.
It's a mitzvah that's always in the month of Adar.
It's a mitzvah in the month of Adar, but it's not a mitzvah.
It's not a Purim.
It's a minhag of Purim.
Yeah.
When is that really supposed to be for Nisan?
Sorry?
Pesach, the Machazita shekel?
No,
when they
it's
count?
supposed to be before you read Megillah, so that our shekel counteracts the shekel of Haman. But there is a halacha that on the first day of the month of Adar, they would announce the shekalim. Not now when we're doing a remembrance of Machatzit shekel. That's what we're doing. Back in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, where they actually had to give a shekel, when did they, a half a shekel, when did they announce it? They announced it on the first of Adar. Which first of Adar? Adar Aleph, Adar Bet. That would be a halacha of Adar. So the Gemara could have asked that question.
But it didn't.
And that's why when it gives Chisure Mechsera, it doesn't say it the way I just said it. Chisure Mechsera v'hachi katani. It's talking about the laws of Adar. Why did he specify the 14th of Adar? Maybe to exclude the question I just asked. Got it?
Yeah.
Okay, this is the subtext when you learn the Gemara, what the mind is doing at the same time while it's reading the words. Okay? Let's carry on. Says the Gemara.
I have a question. At this point, do you have to fast on both on the time that's there? Is it in both months? At this point where we are right
No.
now?
No. Either you'd have an either-or situation, right? Or you'd have, or what's it called? Or you'd have a specifically first Adar situation, because the middle opinion says that you read Megillah lechatechila in the first month, which would mean that you'd be able to do either or. Okay, says the Gemara. All right, now that we've learned who the Mishnah is, which means we have two opinions. Either the Mishnah is the Tanakama, and he means the same as the Mishnah, or the Mishnah is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and we're understanding the Mishnah to mean something which is a halacha of Adar specifically on the 14th, and not something that haphazardly happens to sometimes be in Adar. Says the Gemara as follows. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Avin says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hilcheta ki Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. The halacha is according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, She'amar b'shum Rabbi Yossi, that he said in the name of Rabbi Yossi, and the halacha is, so therefore, all the mitzvot, when do they fall? In the second month. And specifically so. So if you did them in the first month, you'd have to do them again. That's how we're ruling halacha lemaaseh. Rabbi Yossi Amar, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yossi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Vishnehem mikra echad darshu. So when you have these different opinions, okay, one is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi. He's the stalwart first month guy, right? And when you have the opinion of Shimon ben Gamliel, who's a stalwart second month guy, they're both coming, ironically, from the same pasuk. The pasuk says, "Bechol shana u'shana." Now, as we always do.
Sorry, can I?
Yes.
I thought they're comparing Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel with Rabbi Eliezer, who said you could do whenever.
Yes, but he said lechatechila. When do you do it? First month.
Okay.
Okay. Now let's take a look at, and you'll see why I'm saying lechatechila in just a second. Okay. Let's take a look at the actual pasuk, because it's important that we see these pasukim. You see in the inner column you have lekayem alehem. See it? Lekayem alehem. Esther sent them a message that they should accept on themselves liyot osim et yom arba asar, to do the 14th day, lechodesh adar, v'et yom chamisha asar bo, and the 15th day of that month, v'chol shana v'shana, in every year and year. Okay? That's one pasuk. Now look at the second pasuk just preemptively. V'tichtov Esther HaMalka, and Esther HaMalka wrote Bar Avichail, Mordechai Yehudi, et kotokef, the severity of lekayem et igeret HaPurim, to keep the igeret, this document of Purim, hazot hashenit, the second document. And we'll see what this first document, second document. So two things I want you to draw your attention to. One is bechol shana u'shana. She said keep this every year and year. The second thing is that she sent out a second letter and said to them, keep this igeret, the igeret hapurim hazot hashenit. Says the Gemara, where did each one of them learn it from? They learned it from the same pasuk. Okay?
What is the hashenit? What does that mean?
Well, we'll see in a second, but the second igeret, the second letter that she sent out. Okay? Darshu. They learned the same thing. B'chol shana v'shana. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi savar b'chol shana v'shana. It means that there's certain a synonymous nature of the way they wanted you to keep Purim. Every year and every year, it should be the same. What does that mean? Ma kol shana v'shana adar hasamuk l'shvat. Just like every year, which is not a leap year. What month is Adar that you read the Megillah in? The Adar that's close to the month of Shvat. That's the month that precedes Adar. Okay? Afkan, so too in a leap year, we should keep it in Adar HaSamuch l'Shvat, to Adar that is connected to Shvat, that comes to follow Shvat. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel savar. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, keep it the same, Chol Shana v'Shana. Just like in a regular year, you do it in the Adar that comes before Nisan, which is the month after Adar, right? So too in a leap year, you do it in the Adar that's before Nisan. Now, obviously, they wind up on opposite sides of that spectrum. Yeah. Because one said, no, keep it the same. So when should I do it? The Adar is next to Shvat, because that's the month before. Another guy's like, no, keep it the same. The Adar is next to Nisan, which is the month after, right? So each one looked at the pasuk and saw the exact opposite from the first guy. It's the Gemara. Hold on. You're telling me that they both came out with the same way? That doesn't make sense. What, haphazardly, they both decided opposite from one another? Bishlamar Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi. I understand Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi. Mistaber ta'ama. You had either way that you could have gone. You could have went this way, you could have went that way, and you chose to go to the early one, to the Adar that's close to Shvat. Why? Because I have a chance to do a mitzvah. I could do it early, I could do it later. The halacha is don't jump over the mitzvah. So therefore, which Adar did he choose? If he could have chose either, he chose the first one. So I understand why Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi went early.
Is that like Zrizim Makdimim?
Yes, similar, okay? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, my ta'ama, why would he say the second month? If he could choose, it could have chose either. Amar Rav Tevi says, Tama Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the reason Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is Mismach Geula leGeula. since Purim was a redemption, I'd rather put a redemption right next to a redemption, which happens in Nisan. Adif, that's better than put the redemption separate to the redemption of Pesach. So therefore, he chose Adar next to Nisan. Rabbi Elazar says, no, I have a different reason. Why Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel chose late. Amar Tamad Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel mehacha. He learned it from here. Dichtiv, because the pasuk says, "Lekayem et egeret haPurim hazot hashenit," to keep this egeret, this document of Purim hashenit, the second, indicating, like nudge, nudge, wink, wink. If there's a scenario where you have to keep Purim in the first or in the second, keep Purim the second, which is to me an astonishing limud.
Why?
Because that's not. She was saying to keep the second document that she sent out. So she was talking about, there were 2 pages. She sent out a first document and she sent out a second document. And we'll see in a second, what does it mean? Why? What's the first document? What's the second? But she's therefore talking about a second document. So she says doc 2. You know, when you save it and automatically your computer system adds a 1 after it in parentheses. She's talking about the second document. We're saying, no, she meant second document.
You mean it's a stretch?
It seems like a stretch.
Big time stretch.
That's what Rav Tevi is saying. Okay? Because she's talking about a second document. She didn't say Hashenit because she has 2 options for Purim and is telling you to keep the second one. She wasn't talking about a leap year, telling you to keep a second leap year.
We're talking about every year.
She was talking about every year, and she was just saying, guys, keep this second document that I just sent you. Keep what I wrote in it.
So if she says every year, we know for certain there's an Adar Aleph.
That's not
Every
Shushan
year we
Purim.
don't have Adar Bet. So why, if it says every year keep it, why don't we do an Adar Aleph then?
She's saying, well, again, Rav Tevi is saying that we're using the word Shenit to illustrate a second Adar.
Yeah, I get that.
But we have no proof that she was talking about it. In fact, in the context of the pasuk. Now, by the way, hold on. Let's say she only sent out 1 document and said, "Guys, keep Purim Shenit." I get it. That makes no sense other than for the sake of the limud of what you're trying to teach me, right? But here, there was an actual second document.
Shushan Purim.
Sorry?
Second document, nothing to do with Shushan Purim.
No, none to do with Shushan Purim. We'll see in a minute what it was for. Okay. Now the Gemara says,
Killing us with a cliffhanger.
Heinz, the best consoles away.
"V'itzchich," says the Gemara, "V'itzchich li-michtav," and we needed to write both of them. We needed to have, because again, now the Gemara is saying, you just told me that they both learned it from B'chol Shana V'Shana, and how did he decide to go 2? Because he has a word that says Shenit, according to Rabbi Elazar. So the Gemara is asking on him, wait a second, according to you, why do I need the word B'chol Shana V'Shana? Just let me learn it from the word Shenit. V'itzchich li-michtav B'chol Shana V'Shana, T'im Mikol Shana V'Shana, because if I needed both, I need to have both of these to learn bouncing off each other. If it would have said every year and year, Havamina ki kushin kamashmalan hashenit. Says the Gemara, I would have thought, right, if a person had just the word b'chol shana v'shana, what would I have thought? Ki kushin. That we said earlier that maybe you go the first month. So if you only would have said b'chol shana v'shana, what would I have assumed? Hashenit. So the Gemara says, okay, I would have assumed Harishon. Hashenit therefore comes to tell you the second. It's the Gemara. But if I said Hashenit, Yashmin Hashenit, if only said Hashenit, Hava Amina Batichila Barishon Ubasheni Kamashmalan B'chol Shana V'Shana. If I would have only said Shenit, so then what would I have said? Hava Amina, I would have thought that you have to keep it in both of them. So Hashenit doesn't mean only the second, it means even the second. So therefore, B'chol Shana V'Shana tells you the same way you kept it last year where there was only 1 Adar. That means how many Purims did you have? 1. When it comes to a leap year, you should also have 1. So which one are you going to keep? Hashenit.
I'm not following something.
Go ahead. What do
Here
you?
it says
It
you can have
says,
both.
it says if the other, the
Ashmu'inan.
Ashmu'inan Hashenit.
Yeah.
So if it just says the second, why do we assume first and second, and not just second? Why do we assume that we observe in the first and second, and not just the second?
Because she also sent out a first letter,
Oh, okay.
You didn't get that letter.
right?
There were two different
Got lost in the mail.
But it was 2 different letters.
Two different letters, yes.
Right, so it wasn't Doc 1, Doc 2, like the second version.
Wasn't the
first
second
letter.
version. Two separate letters.
Second proclamation.
Second proclamation. But the second proclamation said the same thing as the first.
How do you know?
We'll see in a minute.
I
Yes.
read it already.
Yes.
Are we saying that when you use the word shenit, it really is only applying in leap year? Because without shenit, we automatically know it's Adar. We only have one Adar. So shenit just says every leap year, it's Adar too. Because nothing needs to be applied to when it's not in leap year.
Correct. 100%.
So
So
Shanit is irrelevant in non-leap years.
in non-leap years, it's coming to tell me the halacha in a leap year. Okay?
Got it.
All right? Now, let's continue. The Gemara continues. Now, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi, what does he learn? He learns that we keep it in the first month. Hay hashenit ma'avidle. So what does he do with this word hashenit? Now this question to me, it's so frustrating. You know what he does with it? He leaves it exactly where it is, where it's referring to the second letter. Why do we need an answer for that? Answers the Gemara, Mibayle lekid Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda. It answers this. He uses it for the Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Shmuel Yehuda, Batichila kavua b'Shushan. In the beginning, they sent it to Shushan. Ulebasof, and in the end, b'chol ha'olam kulo. Afterwards, for what's it called, for the rest of the world. Okay.
But didn't it say in the Megillah that they sent out the letter to everyone in the 127 places?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what do you mean a second letter? I didn't read about a second letter in the Megillah. Did you?
In the Megillah it says,
There's two letters?
She sent out a second letter. Okay? Now, if you read it in the second one, right? Look back at the second pasuk. She wrote a second letter to keep this second letter. Okay? Now, the Gemara says, what does it mean? The first letter she sent out, and everyone's like, cool. So that's what we do in Shushan. The second letter said, no, all Jews in all provinces, in every country, everyone has to keep this. So the second letter, what did the second letter do? The second letter added this. Now, according to that, maybe you now understand what the Gemara is asking. Because perhaps the Gemara's question is not what do you do with the word shenit, but what was the function of this whole second letter?
To spread the
Worldwide.
To spread this message.
Reach out.
To send it to everybody, okay?
Shushan versus the rest of the world.
Right.
maybe to clarify.
To make it all inclusive.
Yes,
Maybe to clarify.
to clarify that
Did
it
she say in
applied.
the first letter that only Shushan celebrates?
No,
Right, so it's to clarify letter number 1.
correct.
Right.
So when she did that, so again, maybe the Gemara is trying to understand what is this, what are we mentioning over here with this second letter? Why was it important to keep referring to the second letter? Who cares how she instituted it, with how many letters it took her to get this mission done?
The second letter was
So maybe the Gemara is explaining that the fact that the Megillah included a conversation about a second letter was in order to have the opportunity to say the word Igeret Hazot Hashenit. You understand? That's what it's telling us. Because in general, like, it didn't tell us how many words was in it. It didn't tell us how she got it there, how much the postage was. The fact that it let us know that the process was achieved by sending out Igeret Shenit was in order to teach you the halakha relating to Shenit. Okay? That's how I would understand the Gemara according to this question we're asking. Now the Gemara says, so that's what he's learning it for. Amar Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda says, Shalcha lehem Esther l'chachamim. Esther sent a message to all the chachamim. Kivauni ledorot. Set me in the halacha for all generations. Let us remember what happened here, the Megillat Esther, for all generations. Shalchula, they sent her back. Kin'a at meoreret alenu ben ha'omot. You're going to stir up jealousy if we spread the news of this, that there's a Jewish queen, she turned over the rules, the Jewish people fought back, they killed their enemies. You're going to start kin'ah, jealousy against us for what we've done and for the fact that we're having a holiday about it. I just remember, by the way, this when I read this Gemara, I had flooding back memories. I was asked once to go speak in a school in England, and I was supposed to speak, as far as I understood, to the Jewish society about Chanukah. So I had a whole speech prepared about teaching the Jewish kids about the celebration of the war against the Greeks, the celebrating the defeat of our enemies, this few against the many. Anyway, I walk into this school. It's a non-Jewish school with a Jewish society. I walk into the school, I'm walking through the building. The teacher says, okay, come just this way. They're waiting for you. All of a sudden, there's these double doors. He opens the double doors. I walk in. 600 kids stand up, and he walks me towards the podium. Wow. I look around. I see turbans. I see Muslims. I see this. I see that. And my whole speech is about the defeat of our enemies, the celebration, the miracle of the few against the many. And I had the 30-second walk from the back of the auditorium to the front of the auditorium to come up with an entirely new speech.
Sheni.
New customers. New customers.
Anyway, I wound up switching the speech on the spot, and I spoke about the idea how a person, even if they're challenged by an impossible situation, should never believe that the impossible is impossible until they've exhausted every possibility. You should never stop trying to fix a relationship that you think is broken. Never stop trying to become the very best that you could be, even when things are stacked against you. Anyway, at the end of the class, this Sikh kid walks up to me with his turban on, not Muslim, right? He walks up with this big turban, and he says to me, with tears in his eyes, crying, he says, "Rabbi, that was the most important speech I ever heard anyone give. You've changed my life forever. Thank you so much." I was like, I impacted one kid. He couldn't be a Jewish kid. The kid could be a Jewish kid.
He's the rabbi now?
But I thought to myself afterwards, you know what? The Orla Goyim, you spread the gospel, Yani. Right? Who knows? This guy now is a very positive.
Like the Instagram account.
It's like the Instagram account we talked about.
600 kids.
Yeah.
And they were Jewish.
I would say probably maybe 5%.
Wow.
Maybe 5%. But in the club, so I would have had 30 kids sitting around learning about Pesach.
So why were you asked to speak in a Jewish society with 30 kids?
That's how it works in a multicultural society. They ask the imam to come on Eid al-Fitr, right? And they ask, they ask, what's it called? They ask the what's the guy to come for Diwali, and they have a pastor come for Kwanzaa. That's how it works. So, and everyone sits and listens to inclusion and diversity, and Shalom al Yisrael v'al kol umot ha'olam. Okay, yes.
Do we know the timing of the two letters?
No, I mean I don't know the timing of the two letters. Maybe
Saying
someone else does.
Maybe they're opening up that the circumstances are different in the timing of the two letters.
I don't.
The second year, I don't know if it's referring to that, but it says that Esther made her request in the second year. That was the year following the miracle.
Okay.
Is that referring to the letter?
No, but what I think he's asking is if the second letter was in the second Adar. So I don't know the answer to that. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't.
No, how far apart were they?
Yeah, but I think he's asking that with the end goal being maybe the second letter was in the second Adar, and that would illustrate specifically that that's what she was trying to achieve to tell us, guys, do it here, do it in this month. I don't know exactly the date. We can look into that, and I'll get back to you. That says the Gemara. Shalcha lahem, Esther answers the sages, brilliant. She says, what are you talking about? Kvar ktuva ani al divrei diyamim lemalchem ma'adai uparas. I'm already in the national chronicles of the Persia and Media, the country. If anyone wants to read about what we did, it's already all written up in the books. Like the Megillah ends 2 pesukim later and says, Halohim kituvim, it's already written, b'malchei paras u'madai. So what are you worried about instituting this as a holiday? Anyone can read it forever and ever. Now, what's interesting to me is that I think what the sages were saying, because Esther sounds like she's being the logical one, and the sages sound like they're being illogical.
I don't agree.
1 second, just for the sake here, is that true?
Yeah.
Let me explain my point. She's saying, what are you worried about instituting it? It's already common knowledge.
Right.
Everybody knows.
Yeah, but you're rubbing it in people's faces if you have a holiday.
No, but the point is, what do you mean?
For the sake of this argument, it's that she's
Yeah.
worried that they're worried that the other nations are going to get upset that we're celebrating the downfall.
Okay, so
it's different to celebrate it.
excellent. So one answer is that they were saying, it's a different celebration. I have a proof that that's not true. Why? Because then her answer shouldn't have changed their minds.
Right. But it did.
But it did. That means that was not their reservation. What they were worried about was documenting it.
But it was documented.
Yeah, sorry?
It was already documented.
It's already documented.
Where do we see that?
No,
change
she
their
wanted
mind?
it to be
Because in the end we have where everyone keeps Purim.
Didn't she want it to be in the Tanakh?
Oh, so one of the things we'll see in a second. I just want to point this out in 2 seconds. there's a different language that we have when we say kivauni lidorot, okay? And then in a second, the Gemara is going to bring another shalchalem Esther chachamim kitvuni lidorot. Look like 4-5 lines down. Kitvuni lidorot is different than kivauni. So hear my approach for 1 second. I want to say that this is what's going on in the story. She sends him a message saying, I want to institute it as a holiday forever. The Chachamim say, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? It's gonna foster anti-Semitism. She says it's already written in the books of Persia and Media. And then obviously they agree. Right?
Yeah.
The sages sound like they don't make sense. What was their Hava Amina?
What does that mean?
Right.
Hava Amina, what were they thinking in the first place? Like, it was already, did they not know that it was written in the books of Persia and Media?
Of course they did.
Of course they did. So then, what was Esther's answer that knocked them out? And what were they thinking in the first place? So I think that this is very powerful. What they were saying to Esther is, you're thinking now. We're thinking, forget Persia Media. Today, we live in America. How many American people read the Chronicles of the Kingdom of Persia? She was asking Lidorot. If we know anything as Jews, we know that unless we're in Israel, we're cycling through the countries. So now that you live here, you're instituting a holiday about the defeat of your enemies, right? And that's maybe not such a popular thing.
Who cares what it says here? We may not be here.
We may not be here later. She writes back, yeah, but it's parasu madai.
Was every corner of the world.
What she's saying is not that it's written in the local chronicles. She's saying parasu madai is enough of a empire that even if we go somewhere else, this will be an eternal document that anyone can find. And what's actually quite fascinating is that if you look back at the cultures that were studied, not all cultures were studied. The most intensely studied cultures are Rome and Greek. But Persia is also not maybe as much media the way that we talk about a Madai, but the Persian culture is also intensely scrutinized. Many people feel, or historians agree, that the king Achashverosh, what was his? Xerxes. There's so much, they're still making movies about this guy. Right? They still study his history. So what Esther was saying is, I'm not saying that it's already written. I'm saying it's already written in an empire that is a massively important empire for all times. So it's not like something you're ever going to be able to outrun.
So she had the nevuah to know that we were going to be talking about Xerxes today.
Oh, so how did she know that? The answer is, we know that there are going to be 4 galuyot. We knew that already from the dream of Yaakov Avinu with the ladder. What were the 4 galuyot going to be? We knew that there was going to be Galut, Bavel, Parasu Madai, right? Yavan and Edom. Those are the 4 galuyot. Esther understood from the way things were happening, and that she had a king. She's going to have a son with this king, right? She's going to eventually send the kids, everyone back to the Bet HaMikdash. That if this was the space in between Bet Mikdash 1 and Bet Mikdash 2, this would count as one of the Arba Galuyot. So this would never be forgotten. Because it wasn't just a random, we went to Syria, we went to Spain, we went to Portugal, we went to here, we went to there. It wasn't just a stop on our journey. It was one of the predestined massive Galuyot. So she understood this would be something that would be around forever.
Historical references in the history of Persia about Queen Esther?
There is, if you would go and study it. In fact, there was just an article that I read about historical referencing of Esther. And you know what the funniest thing is? You really don't need much. What we do know, again, even on a historical level, with pottery and coins, is that the Jewish people are chased out of their land by Nebuchadnezzar, by Babylonians. They come to the Babylonian Empire, which is then subsumed by the Persian and the Median Empire. And then we see that the king called Darius, first Cyrus and Darius, or Darius and Cyrus is 2, right? This Persian king inexplicably allows the Jewish people permission to go back and build their temple. And we have the coinage that says that. Who is this? The king that follows Xerxes. So we have a Persian king who then has a son who allows the Jews to go back to Israel and build their temple. How did that happen?
He's Jewish.
How do you know Xerxes is Achashverosh?
So first of all, they have lots of different ways of establishing something. One of the things that they do is that they take pronunciation, they take a literal pronunciation, and they find correlations. So look at the word Achash Verosh and the word Xerxes. It's a double-barreled tongue consonant, and that's where they found a correlation between the king and again, besides for the fact that the child of that, etc., of that
Rabbi,
dominion.
any reason they say Madai Uparas and not Paras Madai here? Or
I don't know. No, I'm not sure. Okay, let's just finish this last piece. Says the Gemara, Rav Chanina Rav Yochanan Rav Chaviva Matnu. They came as a posse, these guys. They always hung out together. Rav Chanina, Rav Yochanan, Rav Chaviva. They taught, says the Gemara, sidebar, B'chulu Seder Moed, anytime in the entire Seder Moed. What's Seder Moed? Seder Moed is Masechet Shabbat, Megilla, Besa, Moed Katan, all the Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, Yuma, Sukkot, right, the Halacha of Sukkah, all of the things that follow, the tractates that follow the ideas of living life around the year with the holidays, okay? So in all of Seder Moed, in this entire book grouping, anytime you find this posse hanging together, right? Actually, Reb Yochanan was not the number 3 guy in the group. It was actually Reb Yonatan. Says the Gemara, Shalcha lehem Esther lechachamim. Esther sent a message to Chachamim. Kitvuni ledorot. Write me for all generations. Shalchu la, they said to back. Halo katavti lecha shalishim. Didn't I write you already 3 times? Shalishim v'lo rebeim. The Gemara says 3 and not 4. What is 3? There's 3 times where we fight against Amalek in the Torah and not 4. And therefore they did not want a 4th instance of a battle against Amalek. Until they found a pasuk in the Torah that supported what Esther was asking. Ketov zot zikaron basefer. Ketov zot, ma shekatuv kan, u'b'mishneh Torah. Write zot, that which we find here and in Devarim. Zikaron, ma shekatuv b'neviim. A remembrance that we find in the Nevi'im. Which altercation do we have with Amalek in the Nevi'im? The story of Shaul. Basefer, Mashikatuv Megillah. So Ketov Zot Zikaron Basefer tells us that there are 4 different instances where we describe an altercation with Amalek. One is in the story of the Torah, when we fight with them when we leave Egypt. The second is when the Jewish people, after failing at the border with the story of the spies, decide to rise up against the mountain, against Moshe's advice. And who chases them and defeats them? When they're not supposed to go into the land of Israel, the Amaleki comes down. So that's 2 in the Torah. Ketov Zot in the Torah. Zikaron, a remembrance, Nevi'im. Basefer in the book, illustrating that there was an allowance for the 4th mention of a milchama against Amalek, and therefore they were able to include it in the Sefer. Now remember earlier, you said Kivauni Lidorot, maybe it means to write them and include them in Tanakh. And I said to you, look at the Gemara. One time it says Kivauni set me. The second time it says Kitavuni write me. The second time she's talking about inclusion in Tanakh. The first time she's talking about inclusion as a mitzvah, as an obligation with regard to this. Now we're going to continue with this Be'ezat Hashem. Let's just finish this last piece. Kitanai, this is a machloket Tanaim. Kitov zot, ma shekatuv kan, what is written here? Zikaron, ma shekatuv Mishneh Torah, Basefer, ma shekatuv B'Nevi'im. Div Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua learns it that way. Rabbi Lazar Modai Omer, Lazar Modai says, Kitov zot, ma shekatuv kan Mishneh Torah. Kitov zot means here in Shemot and in Devarim. Zikaron, ma shekatuv B'Nevi'im. Zikaron in Nevi'im. Basefer, ma shekatuv Megillah. So, according to the first opinion, Kitov Zot is here. Zikaron Devarim. Basefer Nevi'im. Leaving no space for Esther. The second opinion in the Mishnah, which is Rabbi Lazar Amudai, he learned Kitov Zot is 2 references, right? 1, Zot, this. Therefore, that left a space for a 4th one. My friends, why is it that they were reluctant to write a 4th introduction or a 4th concept about the war against Amalek? What was the problem? Why? So what? So you don't have a scriptural reference. Who cares? So there's many different answers to this question. Why did we feel we needed that? What was the point that we needed that? Did every single book in Navi or in Ketuvim, did it need a reference telling you to write it? Right? So I think that there's a deep idea over here. Everything we write in the Torah, it not only is it's there as a term for remembrance, but it also institutes an element, a layer of reality. God looked in the Torah, and from that He created the world. Which means that something that's in the Torah isn't only a historical reference, it also institutes something for the future. The Chachamim did not want to have another showdown with Amalek. And they felt that including another showdown with Amalek would set the stage for another story, another tragedy that we'd need to avert in the future. So they felt better not to write it. And indeed, we actually have another altercation with Amalek. Zu Germania Shel Edom. Like we already saw. The Gemara tells us that it's there. And Baraminan, if the bit is removed, who knows what's going to happen? They're going to take over the whole world. Okay? So my friends, we're looking at a machloket, a push-pull between the Chachamim and Esther. They were afraid of writing it because writing it would give it life. Okay? And with that, we'll pick up Ezrat Hashem next week.